What's up, everybody? GeauxBurns welcoming you to my brand new mini-series, Worst Rides. And no, we're not talking about your first time. This is actually a sequel to a previous mini-series I did a few months ago called Best Rides. And with that one, I went over the vehicles in each category I thought were the best vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. This show is obviously quite the opposite. We're going to talk about the worst cars, the worst trucks, the worst vans. I realize that there's not really a truck category, but we will address that in this episode and in future installments of my Worst Ride series. So today, we're going to talk about the worst supercar, the worst sports car, the worst sports classic, the worst muscle car, and of course the worst helicopter. I'm going to keep it very similar to how I did the four-part Best Ride series, the same categories that I used in each episode of my Best Ride series. For example, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're going over the Super, Sports, Sports Classic, Muscle, and Helicopter. You could go back and watch Best Rides 1.0 after this, and you would see the same categories. The same thing for the 2.0s and the 3.0s and the 4.0s of Worst Rides in weeks ahead. Before we get started, a quick shout out to all my viewers, fans, subscribers who helped me compile this list on both the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Delinquent, Jeremy, and a few others. I really do appreciate your input, your insight, even if we disagreed once or twice. The point is you, yes you, helped make this list possible. Our first vehicle on the list is the supercar category, which goes to the Coil Voltic. And look, this is a very sexy looking car, obviously based off the Tesla. And it's interesting to drive. It was GB, my PS4's very first supercar, and I had it for a few days before I sold it. Now there's two versions, the hardtop and the topless variant, which you can purchase at Legendary Motorsports, but I would advise against buying the Voltic, despite the fact it has a very cheap price tag for a supercar, under $2,000 for either version. I just think that this is not necessarily a vehicle that should be in the supercar category, because you're putting the Voltic up against vehicles like the Adder, the Zentorno, the Entity, the Infernus. And the reality is the Voltic simply cannot compete with those cars. So that's why the Voltic is, in my opinion, the worst supercar in Grand Theft Auto Online. Next, we move on to the sports category, and this was one we had a kind of a debate about until I actually had an epiphany. And every now and then I do have this, it happens, and I remembered the Last Team Standing DLC and a certain car that I was not very impressed with, which, yes, is a sports car, the Führer GT. Now, it looks kinda cool. But my main issue with the Führer GT is not just the fact that its stats are not competitive with the Jester and even the Kuruma, which I think is a really cool little sports car, or the Massacro. The fact is, you take the Führer GT and Los Santos Customs, and there are no customization or mod features for this ride. So for $448,000, for about $500,000, I do not think it's a very good deal for the Führer GT. And overall, that's why I consider it to be one of the worst sports cars in Grand Theft Auto Online. It's too expensive, there's no customization, and the stats do not make it very competitive with any of the top level sports cars like I mentioned, the Jester or the Massacro. The next category on our list comes from the sports classic category. Now there's several sports classics that could have easily made the list for the worst ride. But in all fairness, even though I had a really good time playing with one of my fellow Crow Club members, Explosive 101, thank you for letting me drive around your car. And I really hate to do this because I think it's a pretty car. I think it looks really good. But in my honest opinion, from driving it and from the stats and the price tag, I would say the Lampadati Casco is, in my opinion, the worst sports classic in the game. Despite its looks, it's just extremely expensive for $680,000. It's unliked with the Heist DLC once you complete one of the heist setups in Prison Break. And if it was a little bit cheaper, I would have been more kind with this car, but at nearly $700,000, that's almost the same price tag as Zentorno, which is one of the best supercars in the game. So I just can't let that slide. And the fact is, there is no customization features for the Casco when you go into Los Santos Customs, despite the fact that it does look rather attractive. I would have liked to have a few options, abilities to personalize this vehicle, but unfortunately you cannot with the Casco, just like you couldn't with the Führer GT. Explosive, I hope you don't hate me too bad for that, but I just have to be honest, okay? That's what you guys expect from me, to be honest about my critiques. I still think it's a cool looking car, though, but at the same time, I think if the price tag was lower, if it had a little bit better stats and some customization, I think the Casco would have not made the list. But alas, there had to be a worse ride, and it is the Casco for sports classics. By the way, as with my Best Rides miniseries, you are more than welcome to chime in below in the comment section. Let me know, do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? And what, in your opinion, is the worst ride in each category that we're going to go over? So far, we've done super, sports, sports classics. Now moving on to the muscle category. Now, overall, this is my favorite car category because I love muscle cars. As some of you may have noticed in my garage tour series, by the way, I'm going to do a 4.0 somewhere down the road, sooner or later. And if you noticed, whenever you've been able to game with me and you've done a little personal garage tours with me and you go into one of my garages, whether it's with GB on the PS4 or Janine on the Xbox One, you may notice in each garage I have a couple muscle cars. So yes, I love muscle cars. But at the same time, there is an issue I have with the muscle car category, along with other categories, with certain vehicles in those categories put in there by Rockstar that don't belong in those categories. They should be in their own category. And of course, what I'm talking about is trucks. And this is not going to be the last time I talk about this in my Worst Rides miniseries. With that being said, the worst muscle in Grand Theft Auto Online goes to the Vapid Slam van. Now look, I like the look of the Slam van, that sweet looking 1950s truck. I even like the look of the Lost Slam van. Unfortunately, you cannot get that legally. And by the way, if you have it in your garage through various means, you may want to go ahead and get rid of it because Rockstar is going through a ban wave right now. So you may want to make your Lost Slam van disappear. As I mentioned, I like the look of the Slam van, which of course came with the Festive Surprise DLC for just under $50,000. But looks are all she has. For one thing, like with the Casco and the Fura GT, no customization features at Los Santos Customs for the Slam van. Another thing, horrible, and I do mean absolute horrible stats for this vehicle. And despite the fact that I still have the Slam van in my collection for GB, most of the time, I just leave it in my old truck garage along with my rat truck and my 2 rare rat loaders because while they're fun to look at, they're not exactly the best vehicles for muscle races or for use in missions, which is why the Slam van is the worst muscle. And I still believe that it should not be a muscle. It, along with the rat loader, the rat truck, and several other trucks should be combined into their own truck category or simply moved over to off-road. But I digress. And now for the fifth and final category in Worst Rides 1.0, helicopters. Now, I love flying helicopters in Grand Theft Auto Online. In fact, I happen to have a few helicopters like my Buzzard Attack Chopper, I have the Valkyrie, and I have the Savage. And this was definitely a category that Delinquent and I had a disagreement on. He believed that the worst helicopter is the Cargo Bob. Now, yes, the Cargo Bob is slow because it's a big, giant, stupid helicopter, but it provides some sort of uniqueness to it, the ability to carry vehicles, whether it's a car, a truck, or a tank. I just think that that feature kind of keeps the Cargo Bob off the worst rides list. So that's why the Cargo Bob, in my opinion, is not the worst helicopter, which unfortunately goes to the Maverick. Now, I have nothing personally against the Maverick. It's a very reliable helicopter, and it's usually spawning at helipads and airports if you need a helicopter in order to get away or get from one side of the map to the next side. So it's a decent helicopter, but since this is worst rides, you have to compare all the vehicles in the category and decide which one is the worst of the bunch. As I mentioned, I like helicopters. And despite the fact that it's a decent helicopter, I say that all the other helicopters are better. I mean, for one thing, you should never buy it because, as I mentioned, it usually spawns at various helipads and airports across the map, and it's listed for $780,000, which is unfortunately a lot of money. As I mentioned a moment ago with the Casco, that's about the same price as a Zentorno, so I'd rather have a Zentorno than a Maverick. I mean, stat-wise, I think the Frogger's a better helicopter, and obviously it doesn't have guns like the Buzzard or the Savage or the Valkyrie. 3, which is also why I didn't put the Annihilator up as the worst helicopter. I realize it's slow. I realize there's a lot of people that don't like the Annihilator helicopter, but because it has those guns on the sides, it's definitely not the best quote-unquote attack helicopter on the list. It is not enough to make it the worst helicopter overall because of its uniqueness with those guns, similar to the Cargo Bob's capacity to carry things like a car, a box fuel, a mule, a barracks, or even a bicycle. That is why the Maverick, unfortunately, gets to be the worst helicopter, even though I have nothing personally against this helicopter or any of the vehicles in the worst rides category. It's just my personal opinion, along with a little help from Delinquent Jeremy and a few others. To review, the Voltic was the worst supercar, the Ford GT worst sports car, Casco worst sports classic, Slam Van worst muscle, and of course the Maverick, wrapping up the first installment of my worst ride series. And once again, let me know below in the comment section your opinion, your thoughts about the worst rides in the game concerning super, sports, sports classic, muscle, and of course helicopter. And come back next week for Worst Rides 2.0.